Hello, I'm Don Ward, Chief Executive of CIB, and welcome to another edition of CIB in Conversation. This is all about talking to the leaders and emerging leaders in the world of research and innovation in building, construction, civil engineering, and the built environment sector. And my guest today is Fred Sherratt, of Anglia Ruskin University and newly promoted Professor of Construction Sociology, which for sure we're going to get into. So Fred, hello.
Hi, Don.
Great to see you. Thank you for joining us today. And what we like to do to get started is just to talk to you about how you got into construction in the first place.
Well, that's by complete fluke. By complete chance. I finished my A-levels and my mum the day after said, well, you better get a job then, love. You can't just hang about here. So I toddled down to the temp agency, and luckily I'd grown up with computers. I could type. It's back in the mid-90s. And so I became a temp secretary, and I went to lots of different places across Manchester. And one of those was a building site. And I absolutely loved it. And I was the site secretary for Lang, as was, on a number of jobs, and they rather liked me, so they kept me on, and I bounced around a number of sites, including the Bridgewater Hall, the swimming pool, aquatic centre in Manchester, and I jumped around covering maternity leave or other things for as much as they had capacity for me. So that was really fun. I then had a terrible career change where I became a second line IT support manager at a blue chip company for a few years. And then that wasn't working out. So I quit in dramatic fashion without a job to go to. But luckily, the temp agency rang me up again and said, oh, Lang are wondering if you'd be back for working on Urbis, which is the now the football museum in Manchester. It was the museum of the city. So that was my first sort of proper gig as a secretary. And from that job, I took on the role of document controller. I started in HNC at Bolton Institute, as was, and then I worked my way up through assistant planner. I got an opportunity on the University of Manchester, the University Place project, to move into construction site management, which I grabbed with both hands because I was very annoyed that no one ever followed my programs. Then when I got on site, obviously I realized within about 2 seconds why nobody followed my programs, or why nobody follows any programs, really, blessed. So we had, and then I was working on there, and again worked on a number of jobs. And it was only when the recession really started to hit and Schools for the Future funding ceased that I had to make a sneaky career move. And by then, Ray had taken over Lang, so we were Lang O'Rourke, and it was Paddy O'Rourke, Ray's brother, who agreed for me to do a part-time PhD while I was still working as a site manager. And Paddy supported me through that, God rest his soul. And so I was able to jump into being an academic quite easily. Finish my PhD whilst I was working at Bolton. I managed to find some hourly paid lecturing work. And then I just carried on as far as that goes, apparently all the way to the professor. So it's all a bit fluky.
Well, wow. I mean, it's interesting. I'm from Manchester myself, and so I remember that time. And it seems to me you came in at a time when there were some really exciting projects around.
Yeah, there were.
You named some really interesting projects, and it wasn't as if Manchester had always been, a cauldron of activity in that way. So, what was it particularly that caught your imagination, or when you say you loved it straight away?
I think it's the fact you're making a tangible difference. The people are frankly amazing. I've always enjoyed working in an environment where one can speak one's mind, to not put too fine a point on it. But also the fact that there's nothing you can't do. There's no problem that you can't solve. I like engineering. I like big machinery. I do a lot of craft, so I do sewing and hat making and dressmaking and stuff, and all construction is craft, just on a really big scale. So you're playing with steel and concrete and crane. I love tower cranes and stuff like that. And but back in the day you could go up them and all. You're not allowed to do that anymore. Yeah. So I just really enjoyed the making of something, and it was weird when I stopped being on site as much. My craft went right up. So I now still produce and create, but in a different kind of space. And it was just fascinating to me. I just really, really enjoyed the vibe, the buzz. You don't have to wear a suit. You can occasionally swear, which is nice. And nobody really minded. It was a buzzing, positive, great atmosphere. I always found. I absolutely loved it. And it never changed from, I've had people say to me, well, you were the secretary. Of course, everyone was really nice to you because everyone is. But do you know what? It never changed. All the time I was, even back as a section manager, I've absolutely always adored it. And I think it's one of the most welcoming work environments because it's a meritocracy by and large. Everyone in offices sits behind computers. They could be doing bugger all day. Nobody would ever know. On site, it's either there or it isn't. The wall stays up or it falls down. You can either do it or you can't. And I really value that in a team collaborative space where everybody needs to do their bit and we are all working towards a common goal, which I really enjoyed.
And I mean, your enthusiasm is totally infectious. Have you ever found yourself talking to school children and sort of trying to encourage them to look at our sector in with these sorts of words?
So I have, and I used to have. So I actually went to quite a posh school because my mum is big on for girls, education is much better in single sex, and for boys it's better if they're taught with girls, and the girls suffer. And my mum was, I ain't having that. So I went to a girls' school in Manchester, and I had work experience girls come join me. I never convinced any of them to join the construction industry, but they all had a brilliant 2 weeks. When I used to do careers fairs and things, it'd always be the dads that would come and sit with me as I was sat there with all my programs on the wall and all my pictures of site and everything. So, and I did do quite a lot of outreach at other sort of events, going to colleges, things like that, because I think it's an absolutely awesome opportunity that world's out there. And of course, being at a girls' school, people were architects and all that sort of thing, but no one was like, Fred, you could go and be a site secretary. And I think if I'd had the chance, I would have made a fantastic electrician. But unfortunately, I should have been apprenticing at 15 and getting that sorted, but that didn't really come to pass. So I ended up going the kind of girls' equivalent of the tools of the time, I suppose, being the secretary and working my way up from there.
Well, I'll tell you what, we might extract the last 2-3 minutes of this chat and see if we can't get a few more young girls to watch it, because your passion's incredible. Why did you decide to do a PhD?
I got coerced into that one. So I was at Bolton. I did my HNC. Oh, I was daft. I did my HNC, and because Lang were like, well, let's see how you go, quite rightly, looking back on it. So I took all the options that were all the architecture drawing options. And then when I finished my HNC and passed it, they said, oh, you can do the top up degree. And then I went, shit, because I hadn't done all the right modules to do construction management. So I had to do catch up on law and measurement and all the things that I've been skiving round. But anyway, so I did all that. And it was in my viva for my dissertation at Bolton that it was Roger Seeds, who was a fantastic man, course leader there. And he said, Fred, and I'd mentioned something about safety culture, because my undergraduate dissertation was in response to Ray O'Rourke, who at the time had said women aren't needed on site. And I loved the way he said that, because it was rightly provocative. It needed to launch that debate. And what he wasn't doing was just being a misogynist about the gig. He was actually saying, well, how are we going to make this work? So I wrote my dissertation in response to that. Paddy O'Rourke did read it eventually, I think. And he said he'd send it to Ray, but Ray's never reached out and got in touch. But so I wrote my dissertation on why women were certainly needed on site and how this would improve all things, productivity, but also health and safety for all the workers. If you have to make things less onerous physically so women can do it, then you're also giving the men a break and all. That's not exactly rocket science. So my idea was that women could actually be catalysts for that positive change around occupational health and safety. And I mentioned the word safety culture, I think, and in my viva, Roger said, well, there's your PhD. And I thought to myself, yeah, I'll give that a go. So Bolton offered to pay half my stipend, which was wonderful. And they said, well, will Lang help you out? So I rang up it was Julia Stevens, who's now construction area. She was there at the time, and she said, well, no one's asked us that before, Fred. And then I got a call back, said, Paddy wants to see you tomorrow. So I had to clean myself up, make myself look presentable, get down to Dartford. And Paddy was amazing. And we sat down and we worked out an agreement, and I walked out of there with, yes, we will support you throughout your PhD as well. So I did a 5-year part-time PhD, looked after by Langer Rourke and University of Bolton. And I was also lucky enough to secure some funding out of the CIOB from the then Bowen Jenkins Legacy Fund. So I was quite well looked after. I didn't obviously solve anything to do with safety culture whatsoever. I'm still working on that. But my work was, I looked at how the social construction of safety on large UK construction sites, and anybody that's ever done a literature search will know that's a bloody stupid approach, because you've got the word construction twice, one in your philosophy and one in your practice. So that just led to yeah, it was fun. But so that's how that happened, again, rather serendipitously.
And I mean, you know, recognizing that you had perhaps a slightly unusual background, you know, I don't know what the figures would be, but perhaps the majority of PhD students wouldn't have had your site experience first. How do you think that made a difference for you compared with your with fellow PhD students, perhaps, who would have gone a more traditional route? Yeah,
so I think, I mean, for me, that was absolutely essential because of the nature of the research that I do. So I do very situated constructionist work, in which the researcher is inevitably embedded therein. But what you also therefore need to be able to do is you need to be able to speak the language. You need to know your rubber duck from your yellow jelly. You need to know what's going on, and how people talk about things, because you are also in it. And this is also my lived experience. So I was able to do my empirical work whilst working, which was fantastic. It was absolutely, obviously, the hours I put in. I was like finishing jobs, doing Saturdays, weekends, whilst trying to write a PhD. Yeah, it was fun. And I got married halfway through as well. That was that. But it was part-time. It wasn't too bad. So I think, yeah, it does make a big difference. The fact that it enabled me to have the empirical space, but I also had the experience and the understanding of how the industry works, and worked on these particular sites just from the ground up and from being there and doing it. And I think it's always interesting to me that sort of new PhD students, I do a lot of work supporting obviously my own PhD students now. I've had 5 through my guidance who've all got their qualifications, but and do a lot of doctoral support work. I think it is a big challenge because the construction industry doesn't really do anything in a kind of sense. It's very, how can I put it? It works in a way that no other industry really does, and if you don't know it intimately, it can be quite hard to understand why we do certain things in certain ways and things. I've been reflecting on this lately, because, and this isn't this isn't a plug, but I'm revising my textbook about construction management, and the introduction, the first chapter, is really hard to write. Do I tell people about our supply chains, about procurement, about how clients work, and all those things obviously come together, and it's easier if someone knows all the things at the same time, but you can't obviously do that for somebody. So I feel sorry for some of our PhD students who turn up and the language and the terms that we use in construction could be absolutely baffling. Yes. even if you're from London, frankly. So overseas students particularly, bless them.
And I mean, it's okay to plug your textbook, by the way. We have no problem with plugs here. Don't worry. What's the title again?
Well, that would be, it's just Introduction to Construction Management, and I'm working on the 2nd edition at the moment. Okay, so that excellent. Will be that's all getting really pulled right up to date. So. Okay, excellent. But you mentioned some of the, you know, the challenges that new PhDs must have coming into the sector. So, what sort of, you know, when you sit down with such folk, perhaps early in their studies, what sort of advice do you pass on to them? Well, it very much depends on what they're doing, and how things work. But particularly if it's an occupational health and safety study, which most of mine are. You need to go out and have a look at it, and that's kind of well, that's my guidance for nearly everybody. You need to get out in amongst things and see how it works, what's happening. Go and just spend time sitting, watching, listening, thinking, and you'll start to get to grips with the space that's now your empirical space for your study, in terms of how things work, because they do work differently all across the world, but they work very differently from any other industry. So it's a curious place, but it's a great place, I have to say.
And just before I forget, whilst I'm on the subject of advice, the other group that might be interested to hear your opinion are those people who've sort of followed your path and they're in industry. And they're sort of thinking, well, why should I be interested in a part-time PhD or some sort of academic study? Would you have a message for those people?
I think you have to be, so you have to have a certain innate geekiness. I wouldn't attempt it otherwise. And I'm just going to put that right out front and center. I mean, I remember, I think it was when some of my joiners found out I used to have to walk around with Egghead written on my hat for quite a long time, which I thought was quite sweet. That was perfectly all right. But you have to have a certain level of geekiness. But what it will do is it will open your eyes to a lot of other new ideas, new ways of thinking, ways of doing things differently, how you can even improve your professional practice through developing, reflecting, tailoring what you do to bring in these new ideas from across the world. It is an awful lot of work, but it's really, really rewarding. And of course, once you've got doctor on your cash card and your credit card, nobody can take that away from you, which is rather nice. And
clearly it opens up options at that stage.
Yes.
And in terms of your own position then, as you came to the end of your PhD, you made the decision to stay in academia, but I guess you had the choice, did you, whether to return to construction, to the industry, or whether to stay in academia? What was going on in your mind at that point?
Well, the recession and all the jobs dried up, so there wasn't really. We had the Schools for the Future funding got pulled, and that was where I was at the time.
Okay. Yes.
I noted. So I was always a site level person. I was never a project manager or anything. I don't own a suit, so I'm not smart enough. But I looked at the colleagues I had, and I thought, well, I can go and do something else for a bit, and why not? Let's see how that plays out. So yeah, I did have options. Bolton University were wonderful. Found me some teaching hours that I was able to deliver for them. Tony Octocaluni, who was also the same gentleman that took me on an HNC for building management when I didn't have any pre-qualifications and remotely suitable, but he took a punt on me back then, and I'm still in touch with him to this day, actually. But so he was able, they were really good in being able to give me a little bit of work to keep me going, and then that grew and developed, and then I got a job as a lecturer there, and then I moved from Bolton to Anglia Ruskin for a senior lectureship, and I've been at ARU ever since. So it was, and many times I have actually said, you know what, I could make 3 times this in industry if I went back on site. So I don't do it for the money, that's quite clear. Yeah. But I do it for the enjoyment of working with the students. I mean, I taught lads that I supervised back in the day at Bolton. I remember, he was I think it was one of the fire stoppers walked in my classroom and went, "Oh no," and I went, "Yeah, oh no, you remember me? Now you will work hard." So it's and I think I've really enjoyed the academia, and I've done a whole chunk of teaching, and now I do more research at the moment, obviously, and that's why I've got where I've got.
Wow, cool. And I mean, the other people that watch this this series are early career researchers, so post PhD people, but perhaps finding their way in academia and so on and so forth. What was your experience in their shoes, or perhaps do you have any advice for those sorts of people?
Yes, I do. I do a lot of ECR coaching as well. So I think
perfect.
There are 3 things that make an academic: pennies, which is your research income; papers, oh no, there's 4, sorry, miscounted, papers, which is all your publications, your writing, your textbooks, your journal papers, PhD students, which is the supervision of others, and then profile. And profile is doing things like this. It's speaking at events, it's getting yourself out there. And you need to focus on all of those 4, the 4 Ps, to imbalance to start getting your way. Now, and this really isn't a wild claim, but I would say one of the most important things I did was get involved with the CIB group, because the support there, the networking is really, really, really important. It's been awful. I feel so sorry for new academics in current times, because we've lost the ability to do face-to-face conferences. Exactly, and that's been problematic. We've been very lucky in W99 and 123, because we all know each other quite well anyway, and we are a very welcoming bunch. That's why we all do health, safety, wellbeing research, of course. So we are, but when I was a little baby researcher, that was a big help to me, was meeting some of the big names in my field, people like Alistair Gibb, Billy Hare, all these guys whose papers I was reading and thinking, this is amazing. And there they were all of a sudden chatting to me. So and so it was through CIB and also the RCOM networks that I've actually been able to get out there and talk to people. So I would very much recommend for ECRs, think about your 4 Ps, check you are investing your energy accordingly across that piece, but also you do need to get out there in order to really work on profile. So you do need to reach out to people. You need to be not afraid to go and talk to people you don't know. I was really grateful to my supervisor, Peter Farrell at Bolton, because he made me go to conferences and didn't come with me. So I didn't know anybody. So I didn't really have a lot of choice. So it was either you don't talk to anyone for the next 3 days, Fred, or you do sort of launch yourself into it. It's in the coffee shops at breakfast, it's around lunch, it's in the bar in the evening, and you kind of start building up that network of supportive colleagues. And something I think is very important is to make sure you have a team or a group around you who are on the same path you are. So you've got the same areas. And I have to say, Patrick Manu at Manchester University, he and I have grown up together, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have a similar path with Patrick. We've got our positions at the similar sort of time and doing papers and things like that. So it's really good to have that group of colleagues around you. And colleagues aren't just people at your institution, they're across the world. And I have colleagues across the world that I will reach out to if I have questions, but I'll equally help them back in return. And it's this community, this supportive environment that's really important. You have to give as much as you take, but that's the balance of the thing, and we all want our colleagues to do well as ourselves. So that would be my top advice. Your 4 Ps and get out in amongst it, guys.
Wow. Well, Fred, I'm so pleased to ask that question. But by the way, I said earlier, there's nothing wrong with plugs, and thank you for plugging CIB. We might come back to that, funnily enough. You clearly thought about that hard. You're a brilliant communicator, because 4 Ps is very easy to remember.
Yes, I
know. we do extract parts of these conversations into sort of bundles for particular audiences, and if we haven't already, I hope we'll invite you to come and speak as well at one of our ECR events, because that was just gold to listen to that advice. Thank you. Well, let's talk a little bit more about your area of research and this subject of, construction sociology. How do you, what is it? And I suppose why? Why is it important to CIB and the wider world to particularly think of it in those words?
So it is a title that I will confess to pinching. I pinched it with permission from Professor Andy Dainty, who's now at Manchester Met. The reason for the sociology bit is because all my stuff has always been about people. And I love people. I mean, I love tower cranes as well, but I really, really love people. I like finding out what makes people tick, just getting into people. So the sociology aspect enables me to kind of umbrella all the important bits about construction that affect people. So that's obviously got health, safety and well-being in there, which fits neatly within the W99 work. We obviously work closely with W123, which is people in construction, and that covers other areas. So in the past, I've done work around gender, Although I seem to have a different experience to most people, or some people. I had the best time on site, and nobody ever.
Right. Yes.
I didn't ever have any problems. Possibly because I'm a bit quick on the retort, and I do like my banter. So, and if you're going to come at me with something so obvious, please expect to get annihilated. So that enables me to cover the things around gender issues and issues around race, other complicated people problems, but also, particularly at the moment, a lot of my work is looking at the future of work. It's looking at technology. It's looking at construction 4.0, which is our obviously industrial revolution version, although 5.0 is creeping in as people have realized that maybe technological determinism isn't all it's cracked up to be. So I'm able to do a lot of work under that remit. And it is all relevant, but it's all very, very much to do with the living, breathing people that work in our industry, and particularly site workers. I loved my time on site, and the office, as I said, you kind of lose a bit of that meritocracy stuff, even in the cabins. And I like to be out in the real world where making things happen. And those are the guys that I know do amazing things. And I fear for society the day we lose a person who can put two bits of wood together in a way so they don't fall apart, simply because somebody can do it on a BIM model. I don't see that. I don't see the BIM model coming out helping us build shelter when we need it. So we still have that need for people, and of course good work. We can't automate everything. I mean, that's just ridiculous from a societal point of view. So that's why I've pinched that off Andy, and he and I still collaborate on many things. So it's all about people for me in everything that I do.
And it's sort of that's begged two questions for me, or two aspects of that agenda. One is one can see in society the focus on well-being, particularly. I mean, as we speak, we're 18 months since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, so it's very much influenced how our behaviors and our experiences in the last 18 months. So is well-being a theme in our sector which is very much here to stay, and how do we further prioritize it, really, to ensure that we're not left behind, or we're not how can we raise the profile of the subject such that construction can reach out and attract more of the talent that we need for the future? Are we keeping up with other industries who are focused on well-being?
Okay, I'm actually pulling together an article for Construction Manager magazine on this subject right now, and I've been doing some work a few years ago with UCL around this area. Now, well-being is two different things in construction. It depends whether you're in an office or a site. If you're in the office, people love talking about it because they can do yoga classes. And I don't know if you've read. I've written extensively about this sort of thing. I'm just trying to work out how to articulate it succinctly. So we definitely have the people in the office have a different well-being. On site, everyone just equates well-being to welfare. Now, to me, that's a little bit sad, because how long's welfare been a legal requirement in our industry, but that's still where the site base is. However, we do an awful lot of work about well-being, as we did through corporate social responsibility to people. And too much of it, if you want my humble opinion, is superficial pleasantries. It's in part because to do anything meaningful about well-being on site, you actually have to start looking at big things: procurement routes, cascading subs on subs on subs, so profit is sucked out every single level. So the poor guys at the bottom are killing themselves just to turn a decent amount of wage the week. This is not okay, but these are big ticket problems. These are big questions that our industry, if we are actually serious about well-being, needs to face up to, rather than let's do some courses. Let's have mental health first aiders. Well, the problem with a first aider is it's already happened. What? That's not a preventative. That's not it. Woo, we've got first aiders. Okay, but why are you not trying to do the upstream problems? Why are we still insisting on going on lowest price? Why are we still relying on so many systemic failings within our industry that we're inevitably going to lead to poor well-being across both blue and white collar workers. So there is, and I've written quite a few pieces on that, frankly, where we have another horrible thing we tend to do is we tend to personalize the problem. I've written about that with because obviously make safety personal. Well, yes, but also still the responsibility of the main contractor, I'm afraid. With well-being, there is a focus on what's known as a component model. So the idea that there's this recipe for health. So if we can stop you smoking or eating too much, then that's going to work. But that's a personal individualization. It doesn't address any systemic or the ecological factors that also surround well-being. So there is, I mean, Michael Marmot's work, which we're hearing about actually in the UK at the moment more widely around the social determinants of health, would suggest that maybe lots of construction workers smoke for the reasons of stress, for what are the reasons people overeat? What are the reasons people drink too much of an evening? And it's our failure to address these wider ecological systemic things that I think industry really needs to shape itself. It's all well and good doing a lot of stuff around well-being, but if what you're going to do about well-being is claim that all employees are supported through she says this car map that we've paid for and rolled out to employees, well, that's great, but if you're a main contractor on a site, how many of those people are your direct employees? 12? How many are on the site? 100? But they're all subcontract. So how are you actually cascading this down the supply chains as well? Or are you not? Because what you're saying isn't untrue, but it's kind of a bit cheeky. So I think there is some work to do here. And yes, I'm currently preparing a slightly controversial piece around that, but also doing some more robust work. We did a lot of interviews with UCL prior to the pandemic, exploring the different perspectives and the different ways in which people talk about well-being at different hierarchical levels of the industry. And it's really quite revealing. It really is.
So from your point of view, do you think that the next big research question, or will you now focus on this interlinkage with issues like procurement and supply chain and business models and so on and so forth?
So yeah, and there is, I mean, there's a whole chunk of research sitting behind that. I stopped doing safety research for a while because I got bored with time and money being my findings, and they always are, Don. If you're in a neoliberal economy, you ain't going to get anywhere else. So you really do have to make that case. Some firms are really trying and investing, but then I would also caution that in some places we invest in the wrong spaces. I mean, giving people fruit for breakfast, it looks really good on Twitter on a photo because it's all bright colors and you can have smiley people and all that sort of thing. that actually is probably not the best place to put your money if you still haven't got, say, dust control sorted for occupational health reasons, you know. But dust, not sexy. So we've been doing some work with the CIOB SIG, with the guys out of Kia, Mark from Kia, and he was been looking at dust particularly because it's not sexy, but you know what, it's still killing people, and that sort of thing is important. And I think I can quote one of the people that participated in the work that we did, where he said, yeah, I do care about your well-being, but I also would really rather your leg didn't get chopped off today, and I'm going to prioritize that if that's okay with you. And I'm like, you know what, yes it is. I mean, we shouldn't even be in a space where that could ever happen, but we need to think about what we're investing in to make the biggest, most fundamentally beneficial differences to our workforces. And that's possibly not let everyone have a fry up, because I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be humping rolls of vinyl upstairs without a full breakfast in me. So there's that as well, by the way.
Well, Fred, 2 or 3 times you've referred to the CIOB, so the Chartered Institute of Building, an institute that's now a professional body that's 180 years old or something like that. As an academic, how would you describe the value of that relationship with professional bodies, and how do you think it's developing into the future?
So, well, for me, I've always been quite active with the CIOB. I was one of the founder members of the Novus group up north. which is the young professionals group, which was quite sweet of them because they said it's for under 30s. And I said, you've got to change that then, because I'm already too old. But we flexed that slightly. But I've always been an active member. I was on the Chelmsford Hub when I came down to ARU. And I now sit on the health and safety special interest group for them, and have done for a number of years. So we obviously inform on things of value and where's going on. For an academic point of view, I found it absolutely invaluable. And I think particularly for younger academics and students particularly, I constantly tell my students, you need to get out there, you need to go to the CPD events, because there is a very large community able to inform and help you. And I there was one student, I think she was called Charlotte, and she really went, right, okay, Fred, I'm going to do it. And by the time she graduated, she had a full-time job with a really good contractor. So there you go. Right. And everyone else was like, how did she do that? And I said, do you remember me telling you all the things you could go to and stuff like that? And I mean, even so you've got that network again, but again, you have to get out in amongst it. If you join the CIOB and don't ever do anything, it's not really going to help you out. You've got to be, as it's give and take within there. And I mean, even I think the most funnest thing I ever did was, you also obviously get to do CPD events and attend them. I've seen around some amazing buildings. And I think my favorite was that I've actually went to the steel factory up in Bolton. And I was able to actually touch the steel that is now on top of the cheese grater. Excellent. I believe that was built in Bolton, and I can look at the cheese grater in London and say, you know what, I've had my hands on that.
Apparently, if it's Watson Steel, I think they've got various parts of the Olympic Park as well.
They do.
In London, yes.
Yeah, they do. And apparently that was a bit weird because no one had ever asked to do that before. I was like, why not? Why wouldn't you want to have been able to make that claim? I just didn't get it. Anyway.
Well, brilliant. I'm going to segue seamlessly from CIOB to CIB. You've referred already to the value, the profile and the networking that CIB gave you, particularly early in your career. We haven't really talked about the work of the Commission, which you're joint coordinator for, which is W98 on health, safety and...
99.
Oh, there you are. I'm only chief executive. What do I know? My apologies to all members of W99. Health, safety, and wellbeing. That's why I don't like these numbers. I prefer to try and think of them in terms of the titles. Yes. It kind of brings them alive and helps my memory. What's the latest challenge, or where's the latest work program at for that commission?
So in W99, we're blessed, but I think we are blessed because of what we do. And as a community, we are an incredibly loyal, supportive, welcoming space across the world. We have members on every continent. Hopefully someone's on Antarctica right now. And we have a group of, if you are a leading researcher, author in occupational health and safety and construction, you are a member. And these people show up, and it's beautiful to have people like Helen Lingard and Alistair Gibb and people across the world coming together to share what they're doing and seeing and working with those people year after year. So we've only just had our annual conference, and it's a conference we're able to host annually every single year because we have that community and we are able to sustain that momentum and that engagement. This year was sadly virtual. Again, but there was a strong emphasis on mental health there. So it leads very much into what I was saying earlier about well-being, mental health within the industry. But the work that we do, and I know certainly colleagues in Australia focus on, is that upstream, is that systemic ecological context. So that's something that's very much coming to the fore at the minute in the work of the Commission. I would pull that out as our leading element, which doesn't sort of mean we are not still paying attention to safety, certainly, even though it's often, that was the winner for a very long time. Health recently got its acknowledged just dues, perhaps, yes, coming in as well in recent decades. And I think we do have a good balance across the aspects that we are trying to do. And we work very closely with W123 as well. I have to give Fidelis a shout out for that, because people in construction, the areas of synergy are obviously quite considerable. So because occupational health, safety can lead into other areas around people and work, where that comes in. So I would say, Don, you've already grabbed it. The well-being, the mental health aspects of both blue and white collar workers in the industry are a serious concern at the moment. And I know a lot of colleagues are starting to work in those areas a little more.
And when a lot of us gather in Melbourne in June 2022 for the World Building Congress, do you think this will be perhaps the key theme that we ought to be pulling out as a headline from that debate, perhaps alongside a focus on climate change and environmental sustainability?
Yeah. Which of course is not good for anyone's mental health.
Yeah,
so I think, and I think we need to have a look. Certainly, I'm sure that will come up. We're going to have a number of streams at that conference. My joint coordinator, Billy Hare, is obviously, we're working very closely together on that. And we will have a number of sessions. It wouldn't surprise me if a session was entirely around mental health well-being, simply because of the contributions we can make there, and linking into these bigger pictures. Something I've always liked about W99 is that we never shy away from making these grand sort of missions. So for example, yes, well, climate change, but hang on a minute, that's really not going to do anybody any good in our remit, in our field. How is that affecting them? How can we ensure that there is still sort of, we are working as an industry holistically to the betterment of society and the planet, she says, hopefully.
Fred, I cannot believe I've run out of time. Time has absolutely flown in this conversation. It's been fantastic. I think we need a second and third part. This is a whole series of your own. Before we finish, though, and you might help both of us with a shortish final thought on this. I like to end by asking all our guests what you see as the top opportunity or challenge that you would want policymakers and government ministers to be thinking about around the world that are related to our sector.
I would like to make them think very carefully about systemic things, about ecological things, and I would very much suggest that what they need to do is stop thinking that doing the same thing but with a little bit more gusto will bring change. We need really quite systemic, I'm going to say violent, we need big things to happen at the moment in order to actually bring about change. We are stuck in Margaret Thatcher's "there is no alternative." Well, actually there is. There are different economic models, there are different solutions. The solution to technology not helping is not more technology, perhaps, which is why I'm quite pleased to see the industry 5.0 not long behind 4.0, but we shall see how that works out. So I think we need some really significant radical rethinking of how we do what we do and why, and how we can refocus away from profit and back onto people, I think it would be my advice. I'd probably say that a little more robustly if I was actually in the hearing of anybody.
A focus back onto people from profit is a very nice way to conclude our conversation today, Fred. I think my advice to those policymakers would be to invite you in for a chat, because I can't think of anybody more compelling to listen to on this subject. Thank you so much for your time today. Unfortunately, we've run out of it. This has been CIB in Conversation. To me, incredible, inspirational people like Fred. It's easy to get involved in CIB. The CIB commissions add terrific value for all our members. They're the core engine room. And if you don't do anything else, think about trying to get Melbourne late June 2022 into your diary, because all these great industry academics, experts in our field with similarly, well, they're probably not quite as inspirational as Fred, but nevertheless highly inspirational folk will all be present for what, as Fred has said, will be one of the first face-to-face conferences in 2 years, and the value of those conferences cannot be overstated. So for more information on CIB and Fred and all our work, please see our website. For now, for today, that's it from a superb edition, I think, of CIB in Conversation. Thank you very much.